Hi, want to welcome you and thank you for streaming this message today. I'm really glad that you joined us. At Bailey Christian Church, it matters to us that you feel welcomed, like that this is family. Whether you're young or not so young, my hope is that you'll encounter Jesus, and that as you encounter Jesus, you'll find encouragement to live a life of faith for Him. If you're new with us today, I would love if you wouldn't mind filling out the Connect card that is linked here, or going to baileychristianchurch.com and letting us know who you are, if you have any questions that we can follow up with, or even if you have a prayer concern and you'd like somebody to pray for you, we'd love to know so that we can connect with you. If you're in the area sometime, in the Bailey area, we'd love to have you join us in person. And the reason I invite you into that is because we're called not just to experience a message, but actually to live a life of faith in the context of community. And so we'd love for you to be a part of what's happening here at Bailey. And if you want to know more about how you can get plugged in to what's happening here, again, go back to baileychristianchurch.com, check things out, and if we can help you, we would love to follow up with you as well. I hope today that you're blessed through this message. So if you are just joining us, we've been on this series through the Gospel of Mark, the good news of Jesus in Mark, and it's been called the journey to the cross. One of the unique things about Mark is that a third of his gospel is dedicated to that final week. And so we are now in that week. It's what we're going to see here in a moment. It's a triumphal entry, or what you might think of as Palm Sunday. But by the end of that week, before the week is over, Jesus is going to be on that cross. So we're going to start out this at the beginning of the week realizing that Jesus knows what lies ahead, but nobody else does. And you're going to see that as we come into this, as he enters into Jerusalem. It's this two very different worlds going on, that the people of Jerusalem are going to be hailing him as the king, the son of David, and not realizing what throne he's going to be on at the end of the week is going to be a cross. With that in mind, I want to invite you to, we're going to take a look at your insert to begin with, just to kind of set the stage, and then we'll get into the passage. Two things I want to highlight as kind of preparation for the message. Up until this time in Mark, Jesus is attempting to keep things fairly quiet. You will have noticed that if you read through Mark, where Jesus at times is telling folks not to tell others about a miracle, or he's silencing the demons. He also doesn't want wrong ideas of who the Messiah was meant to be to spread. So all of these things you see in Mark, Jesus kind of keeping things in somewhat on the down low. Now he can't, obviously the word is spreading, and people are coming to him, and it's kind of forcing him out into even outside of cities at times. But up until this point, Jesus has not been in Jerusalem, at least in Mark. We know in the other Gospels that he has been, but the way Mark has written his Gospel, he doesn't mention some of those things. So he kind of builds to this final culmination of things. But here's the thing I want you to understand. Now he's going fully public. Up to this point, he may be kind of tamping things down. He may be he's revealing himself in different ways to different people. But now he's going public. I mean, this is all out in the open, and we're going to see that on display, even if people don't fully understand what it means. To give you a sense of what that setting looked like, I want you to understand this is the week of Passover. And the week of Passover was full of energy and anticipation, particularly because if you're waiting for a king to come, I mean, this is a perfect time. Because the Feast of Passover, just so you understand, was a remembrance of what God did for his people coming out of slavery in Egypt. And you got the 10 plagues, and then God parts the Red Sea, and they make it through that. But before they leave, they kill the Passover lamb. And the Passover lamb, the blood of the lamb was put over the doorpost of the homes of the Israelites, of the Hebrews. And when the death angel came through, it spared God's people. But it took the firstborn child and animal out of all of the other Egyptian households. And so it was a declaration, it was a meal that they would remember and relive out on a regular basis. And there was this sense of God is here to deliver us. And so every time the Jewish people would have been participating in it, there's this sense of, is God going to deliver again? And so go back to the insert. Passover was full of energy and anticipation. You need to understand this. The normal population of Jerusalem at that time was about 25 to 30,000. But at Passover, scholars believe the population would rise to about 250,000, 300,000. In fact, the Jewish historian Josephus would claim later on in that first century that 3 million or so Jews would show up. Scholars aren't sure that that's fully accurate, but whatever the case may be, we're talking throngs of people filling the streets of Jerusalem. So that's the setting. Let's go to the passage. Mark chapter 11, beginning in verse 1. Mark 11, verse 1. As they approached Jerusalem and they came to Bethphage and Bethany at the Mount of Olives, Jesus sent 2 of his disciples, saying to them, "Go to the village ahead of you. Just as you enter it, you will find a colt tied there, which no one has ever ridden. Untie it and bring it here. If anyone asks you, 'Why are you doing this?' say, 'The Lord needs it, and we'll send it back here shortly.'" And so they went, and they found a colt outside in the street tied to it at a doorway. And as they untied it, some people standing there asked, "What are you doing, untying that colt?" And they answered as Jesus had told them to, and the people let them go. So let's kind of break this down a little bit. First of all, they're approaching Jerusalem from the Mount of Olives. Now, Bethany is about 2 miles on the southeast slope of the Mount of Olives, and they would go through Bethphage and then the Garden of Gethsemane, and then they would enter into Jerusalem. Bethany is also a place where Jesus spent a lot of time. That's where Lazarus is from. That's where Mary and Martha, his sisters, are from. So when you read stories about them, you recognize that he's in Bethany, which is this proximity that he's going through right now. But there's several things that we see about Jesus, even as we start to enter into Jerusalem. One is Jesus is in charge. Jesus is the one that is staging things. He knows what lies ahead, and he's in control of the situation. In fact, Jesus knows things in advance. So we already get a sense of, he's saying, you're going to go to a certain place, and there's going to be a colt there, and here's what's going to happen, and take that donkey, and these people are going to ask you this question. And if they ask you this question, here's what you tell them. In fact, it's interesting. All of this just shows that Jesus is in charge. And then he says, and if they ask you, just say, "The Lord needs it." Now, I don't know for sure if they understood when they said the Lord needs it to these folks, if they understood who Jesus was, or if by this point people know so much about who he is that for him to say that was enough to go, "Oh, hey, let the Lord have it." It's almost as if, I remember watching TV shows, cop shows back in the 70s and 80s and 90s, and they'd be in a chase, and the bad guy would get in a car, and the cop doesn't have a vehicle, and so he, "Hey, I got to take this," and he commandeers somebody's vehicle, and he kicks him off the motorcycle, and that's what's happening here. Jesus has the authority to commandeer something. Now he says, "I'm going to send it back." I always wondered, did they ever get their car back, after Starsky and Hutch, stole the vehicle or something? But so Jesus is taking charge, and for him to say that is a sign that he's in control. Now let's go back to the text. Verse 7. When they brought the colt to Jesus and threw their cloaks over it, he sat on it. Many people spread their cloaks on the road, while others spread branches. See, this is where you get the Palm Sunday that they had cut in the fields. And those who went ahead and those who followed shouted, "Hosanna! Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. Blessed is the coming kingdom of our father David." So these are shouts, by the way, that are taken Some of this is taken from Psalm 118. They're referred to, there's some psalms in that section that are referred to as the Hallel. And they were songs that were sung during Passover. They were songs of worship and celebration, but also a heart's cry for God to deliver. And Hallel refers to thanksgiving and to lifting up praises to God. And so those words are on the lips of the people. That already is going to make the Jewish religious leaders nervous. They're going, what is happening here? In fact, the word Hosanna is a word that means save us. And it's kind of a shout of praise, but it's this idea that as this king is coming through, they're saying, save us, you're the son of David. You are the one that we've been longing for. Hosanna in the highest. This is a kingly entrance. I'll give you a couple of indications of why that. So first of all, the colt is unridden. Kind of a virgin colt, so to speak, which means it's sacred and appropriate for a king to enter on. That's number one. Second of all, you see the followers putting their cloaks on the back of this donkey and then laying them in the road. It's almost as if this is the red carpet treatment. We don't even want our master, our king, to sit on this. We need something between him, and we don't even want the feet of this donkey to hit the dirt of this road leading into Jerusalem. So we're going to lay palms down. So there's this whole sense of celebration. This is very kingly. But not only that, the Jewish people had begun to understand certain passages in the Old Testament as prophecy of a Messiah, a Savior who would come. And so here are the kind of things that would have been in their minds. Let's go back to the Old Testament. Genesis 49, verse 10. So all the way back to Genesis, when the tribes or the sons of Jacob are being blessed by Jacob. And this is a prophecy about Judah. The scepter will not depart from Judah. Genesis 49:10. Nor the ruler's staff from between his feet until he to whom it comes shall come, or he to whom it belongs shall come, and the obedience of the nations shall be his. Now, come to understand this, that David was from Judah, Jesus was from David, who was from Judah. So all of that is lining up. And then verse 11, he will tether his donkey to a vine, his colt to the choicest branch, and he will wash his garments in wine, his robes in the blood of grapes. It's this image of kingly affluence and power, and that one day coming from Judah will be a ruler. And so Jesus is fulfilling this image. And then even more specifically, Zechariah chapter 9, verse 9. Zechariah chapter 9. This is a prophecy of what is to come. This is a prophecy of this Messiah that is coming. It says, rejoice greatly, daughter Zion. Shout, daughter Jerusalem. See, your king comes to you, righteous and victorious, lowly and riding on a donkey, on a colt, the foal of a donkey. I want you to notice something. It even says, so you have this king coming in, but he says he's coming in lowly. What do you mean by lowly? Well, he's not coming in on a horse. I mean, that's how the Romans would have come in, with victory and power. Jesus comes in on a lowly colt, which is reflective of his kingdom. He's humble. He's coming in as a servant. And so all of these things must have been playing in their minds, even if they didn't fully grasp what was being said. It had to have sparked concern among the Jewish leaders. They were afraid. They were afraid that if something happened, that Rome was going to come in and take their power. And so they were very concerned about having that issue happen in their own setting. That somehow if they didn't squelch this, that somehow the Romans, who were very concerned because the Roman leadership was nervous around feasts like Passover. Because you got a large crowd of people from the Jewish people who might actually want to revolt. That's a scary thing. And so the religious leaders and the Roman leaders had to have been a bit nervous as they caught wind of what was happening. But also what we're going to see is this is going to show the Jewish people had a misunderstanding of what the Messiah was supposed to be, because they hoped the very thing that the Jewish leaders or the Romans were afraid of. They hoped that this new Messiah, this new king would come in and he would deliver them from Rome. And Jesus is going to show, and he's been showing throughout Mark, that that's not the kind of Messiah he is. So let's go back to the passage. Verse 11. Mark chapter 11, verse 11. So Jesus entered Jerusalem and he went into the temple courts. He looked around at everything, but since it was already late, he went out to Bethany with the 12 apostles. Now I just gotta pause here. What's that all about? That's an interesting statement. Jesus went into the temple, kind of looked around, and then he left. Why mention that? Is Jesus enamored with, look at the big stones and the gold and all this stuff? Is that what he's paying attention to? No, that doesn't excite him, but also he's been to the temple before. So it's not his first time there. And so we must ask, why is Mark highlighting this? Well, I happen to think it's because of a prophecy that we find in the book of Malachi, in Malachi chapter 3, verse 1. And it's going to be a build-up to what's going to happen the next day. In Malachi chapter 3, verse 1, the prophet says, I will send my messenger who will prepare the way before me. So we already know that John the Baptist has been a messenger before Jesus who's prepared the way for the king to come. But then he says, then suddenly the Lord you are seeking will come to his temple. So wait a second. So I'm going to prepare the way, and then all of a sudden the Lord's going to show up at his temple. The messenger of the covenant whom you desire will come. So the very one that you're hoping for, he's going to show up. But look at verse 2. But who can endure the day of his coming? Who can stand when he appears? For he will be like a refiner's fire or a launderer's soap. He said the very day you're hoping for is going to come, but you're not going to be all that happy. Because when he shows up, when the Lord shows up to his place, to his temple, to the house of God, there's going to be a price to be paid. In fact, he talks about using, like a refiner's soap. And so at times, what's going to happen here next is referred to in some Bibles and commentaries as the cleansing of the temple. But Jesus really is not coming to cleanse the temple. He's ultimately coming to judge the temple. And he's coming in preparation for judgment of the people of God because they have missed the one who has come into their midst. In fact, I think it's in Luke, where Luke tells a story, and when he comes to Jerusalem, as Jesus is looking out over the city, he weeps for Jerusalem. He says, Jerusalem, Jerusalem, oh, that you would have understood the day in front of you, but you're missing it. The Messiah, the one you've said you've been longing for, is me. I'm here, and yet I know what's happening at the end of the week. We're going to get into that cleansing here in just a moment, but before we do, there's an interesting story about a fig tree. And it's this little telling of the fig tree that happens between Jesus and his disciples that is going to kind of parallel what's going to happen in the temple. So take a look at verse 12. The next day, as they were leaving Bethany, so he went into Jerusalem, went back to Bethany, spent the night, and Jesus was hungry. And seeing in the distance a fig tree in leaf, he went to find out if it had any fruit. And when he reached it, he found nothing but leaves, because it was not the season of figs. And then he said to the tree, may no one ever eat fruit from you again. And his disciples heard him say it. Now, what is that all about? I mean, Jesus is just a little testy. I mean, he hadn't slept well. He's hangry. Is that what's happening here? He's ready to eat. There's nothing there. And he's like, I'll show you. But it seems a bit severe. I mean, really taking a tree out just because, it's not doing what it wouldn't be doing anyway because it's not the season for figs. Well, I want you to understand, this is one of the things that Mark does, and I mentioned this before. Mark will sometimes introduce a story, interlude something else, and then he'll come back to this story. He sandwiches this next story, and that's what's going to happen. So we'll come back. Put a pin in that. We'll come back to that part. Now the real story begins in verse 15. On reaching Jerusalem, Jesus entered the temple courts, and he began driving out those who were buying and selling there. Some of you may have seen The Chosen in the last couple of weeks and seen this particular scene being lived out. It's dramatic. He overturns the tables of the money changers and the benches of those selling doves, and he would not allow anyone to carry merchandise through the temple courts. Let's pause here for a second. Is that the Jesus you tend to picture? I mean, we typically see Jesus, holding children, and he just seems serene and peaceful. And here, he's furious. He's turning tables over. He's beating people out. He's letting the animals go, all this kind of stuff. And then he starts to declare why in verse 17. And as he taught them, he said, "Is it not written, my house will be called a house of prayer for all nations, but you have made it a den of robbers." There's a judgment going on here. In verse 18, of course, not everybody's happy about this, as you can imagine. The chief priests and the teachers of the law heard this and began looking then for a way to kill him. For they feared him, because the whole crowd was amazed at his teaching. They're afraid, because they know the crowd is hanging on his every word. They see the Romans in the background. They know their power structure. The temple is the center of their power. And so it says, when evening came, Jesus and his disciples went out of the city, probably back to Bethany. So let's reflect a little bit. What was the purpose for Jesus' outburst here? I mean, why we thought he was ticked about the fig tree. Now we're talking really because he didn't eat. Now he's even more hangry. I mean, is that what's happening here? Well, I just want to give you a hint. No, there's something far deeper than that. And you might say, well, was it because the people were being cheated? Because there's, it talks about den of robbers and so forth, and of thieves, and people are getting kind of robbed blind, so to speak. Well, I just want you to understand a little bit about what's happening. In order for travelers to come from, particularly outside the city, and to pay a temple tax, and then to have animals to sacrifice, have their Passover lamb, you couldn't bring that if you're coming from a long way. And the coins that they would have had would have been Roman coinage with the picture of Caesar on it. You can't pay the temple tax with a picture of Caesar on it. So you got to exchange your money for the shekel that would be paid in the temple. So all those things seem kind of practical. Now, we will say that they were taking advantage of people because they had them over a barrel, and so the exchange rate was exorbitantly high at times, I'm sure. And then you have the, whatever would have been for the animals themselves. But here's the point of it. It was the priest that profited from this. It was the chief priest and his minions there in the temple. This was their living. And so it was their power structure. It was the center of their power. We're going to come back to that in a moment. And so we might ask, well, was it wrong for them to do commerce here? I mean, some of those things seem practical for people coming in outside the city, aside from the fact that people are probably being taken advantage of and so forth. Well, people had to travel, and so it made sense that they would have had to pick up a lamb that was perfect in order to be sacrificed. But the key is that this was all done under the oversight of the chief priests. David Garland put it this way. He said, the temple was the central bank, it was the Capitol building, and Wall Street, all wrapped up into one. And so what was happening is you have this blending of the sacred, the religious, and the secular. One of the most dangerous things that Christians or people of God over the centuries can get into, one of the biggest problems they can have is when they get too much power. That's what happened, I believe, with the Roman Catholic Church back in different periods of time where Rome and the power of the empire combined. Whenever that happens, and even when that can happen in other nations as well, when the church or the people of God become so aligned with the secular powers, you don't know where one begins and where the other one stops. And so that's what's a big part of what's happening here. The other thing is this: it was their power base. And so this power gave them cover for living in ways that were displeasing to God and to forget God altogether. It's as if God is not allowed to be in his house anymore. But what about that den of thieves? So is there stealing going on? What's happening here? Well, let's go back to an Old Testament prophecy, Jeremiah chapter 7, verse 4. Jeremiah 7:4. So the prophet Jeremiah is prophesying in his day about what he sees going on, and it's a continuation of the same stuff, and it's now being fulfilled in Jesus' day. He says, "Do not trust in deceptive words and say, 'This is the temple of the Lord, the temple of the Lord, the temple of the Lord.' In other words, he's saying, you think you're good because you're in the temple of the Lord. You think you got cover. And then he goes on to say, will you steal and murder and commit adultery and perjury and burn incense to Baal and follow other gods that you have not known? He's saying outside the temple, maybe at the temple too, but outside the temple, you're doing all these other things, and then you're showing up at the temple thinking you're good because you and God are close. You're in God's house. And then he says, and then you come and you stand before me in this house, which bears my name, and you say, we are safe. Safe to do all these detestable things? Has this house which bears my name become a den of robbers to you? But I've been watching, declares the Lord. When Jesus shows up the day before and he takes stock of the temple, that's what he's doing. He's in essence living this out, saying, I see you. I see what's going on here. Now let me go back to this den of robbers, or den of thieves, is in your insert. I want you to understand something. This is kind of an interesting insight. That den of thieves is where thieves live. It's not where they do their stealing. It's where they do their hiding. Now, I'm not saying that there wasn't thievery in some ways or taking advantage of people in the temple, but it was more than that. It was, this is where we live. We do our stealing out here, but here's where we're safe. And so the essence is that Jesus is saying, you think you're safe because you're in his house. Well, you got another thing coming, is what he's saying. And so what Jesus is doing is he's turning over tables and he's pushing the animals out. There's a judgment happening. So go back to your insert. Jesus' actions are a judgment lived out on the temple in the sacrificial system. As he's, just think of this, as he's pushing the animals out, it's as if to say animals will one day no longer be able to be purchased or sacrificed here. Something new is happening. And a judgment of God's people is happening. In fact, Jesus will say in Matthew 24 and in Mark 13 and other passages, he'll prophesy the day that one day there won't be a stone standing on another here at the temple. And that actually happens in 70 AD. This is the beginning of that judgment. And so Jesus is declaring in his actions a new day is dawning. But let me ask you, there's another question before we move on from this part of the passage is, was Jesus also maybe upset because they were blocking the Gentiles? And here's what I mean by that. The temple was set up where on the outskirts of the temple you had what was called the court of the Gentiles. And the idea was that the Gentiles could come within listening distance and observing distance so that if they had this desire to know this God of Israel, they could convert, actually. But this allowed them to get at least somewhat close. Now, the next court was a court of women, and then you have other courts, and eventually the Holy of Holies. In fact, now, on the one hand, it was an opportunity for Gentiles to kind of be a part of things, even if from a distance. But they were also very clear that there was a wall between that and the court of the women. And on that wall, it basically said, Gentiles not welcome here, on punishment of death. And so Gentiles knew that they were not supposed to be there, but they could at least be here to kind of observe things. But here's what was happening in Jesus' day, is that the court of the Gentiles is kind of the outskirts of the temple. It was becoming a shortcut from the Mount of Olives. And so people were just kind of cutting through here, forgetting what it was all about. Forgetting the purpose and the point. And then you have all this selling and buying and everything going on. It's almost as if to say, there's no room at all for Gentiles. And I think what Jesus is going to be saying is, you don't understand, that was your mission. Your mission was to actually proclaim this to the rest of the world, to be a lighthouse to them, and you have actually become a barrier to the world. So go back to your insert. Jerusalem, the temple, the people of God had forgotten its mission as a lighthouse to the nations. And Jesus had already shown through his ministry, his desire was to bring in the outcast, was to reach out to the least of these, those that the community had rejected. He said, the kingdom is made for you. And so here the people of God, the temple was being used for the very opposite reasons. And so Jesus brought judgment in this story, not merely cleansing, but he's closing a chapter in Israel's history. And go back to the insert, and here is what is going to be happening. They don't understand this. I'm sure, in fact, the Jewish leaders are furious about this. But here's what we're going to see in time that's happening. That the house of God, the house of prayer, will now run not through Jerusalem, but through Jesus. It's not going to go through the temple anymore. Jesus is going to be the new standard, the new center, the core. And that's why Jesus says at the very end of this prophecy, quoting from the Old Testament, he said, "My house, you made my house a den of thieves, but my house was meant to be a house of prayer for all nations." And so if this is going to be lived out, it's going to have to go through me, not just to save the Jews, but to save all the world. And that may be one of the reasons why he's so furious, because they are blocking out the world from seeing God. Let's go back to verse 20. Go back to the fig tree. "And in the morning, as they went along, they saw the fig tree withered from the roots." It didn't just kind of have a bad season, it was done. And Peter remembered, and he said to Jesus, "Rabbi, look, that fig tree you cursed has withered." And Jesus says, "Have faith in God." Jesus answered, "Truly, I tell you, if anyone says to this mountain, 'Go throw yourself into the sea,' and does not doubt in their heart, but believes that what they say will happen, it will be done for them. Therefore, I tell you, whatever you ask for in prayer, believe that you have received it, and it will be yours. And when you stand praying, if you hold anything against anyone, forgive them, so that your Father in heaven may forgive you your sins." Mark sandwiches this story of the cleansing or the judgment on the temple in between this story, the beginning and then the revisiting of the story of the fig tree. And one of the reasons that, before I get there, I want to say this. Some scholars and people throughout history have really, it's bothered them. Have you ever watched a movie and people are dying all over the place, but then the puppy dies and you go, "Oh, how could they do that?" What about the 15 people that just got slaughtered here? But it's a puppy. I think sometimes people do that. What's a tree doing? He's not hurting anybody. It's just doing what trees do, and it's not even the season. And why is he so ticked? In fact, one scholar put it this way: this is a gross injustice on a tree which was guilty of no wrong and had only performed its natural function. Jesus can make another fig tree, by the way. But he's not just ticked. That's not what's happening. It is a living parable of what just took place. That the fig tree, just like Israel, looked like it could bear fruit, but it always came up empty. It looked like it was ripe and ready for harvest, but there was no fruit to be seen. And so this example of what Jesus is doing is to tie into what he's just done in the temple. And he's saying, I want you to not only look the part, I want you to be the part. I want you to bear fruit. I want you to be a witness and a lighthouse to all the nations. Now, he has this, there are times where in the Gospels you have several things kind of linked together and you go, I'm not exactly sure how all of these things come together at that very last part of the passage, and I'm not fully sure either. But he says, yeah, I did that, but I'll tell you this. If you have faith, you can tell this mountain to be cast into the sea, and it'll be done. And so, in some senses, a mountain can be reflective of a challenge and a problem that we have. But we have to also be honest, it's been a long time since any of us have probably cast mountains into seas. And so you go, what's going on here? Well, one of the things that I think may be going on is not only a step of a lesson about the fact that you can trust God and God answers prayers and he'll help you mount any mountain that gets in your way. This also may be a very clear indication of the judgment that's coming. The Mount of Olives or the Temple Mount will be cast down. I want you to know that that is yet to come. And that what's going to happen is that the new temple or the new way to God is going to be marked by forgiveness and by faith and by purity of heart. That's what it's going to look like. Well, with all of this said, and we've covered an awful lot of territory, let's just take a couple of minutes and wrap this up with, as Jesus is approaching Jerusalem, with all the stuff that he does here, and there's more to come. There are three things in particular that we're reminded of as Jesus heads toward the cross. Number one, It's not enough to simply look like you're a follower of Jesus on the outside. It's not enough to look the part, to wear the names. Hey, my family goes way back in this church. My great-great-grandpa was a pastor. So what? The Queen Mary, I don't know if you, when I was a kid, I actually got to go to California and see the Queen Mary. Now, a lot of you are going, who is that? What is that? Well, Queen Mary's a ship. It's not a person, but I mean, it was a person, but it was also a ship. And it was the largest ship to cross the ocean when it was launched in 1936. And Robert Wentz goes on to say, through 4 decades in a world war, she served until she was retired and anchored as a floating hotel and museum in Long Beach. Well, during the conversion, her 3 massive smokestacks were taken off, and they were to be scraped down to the metal, and they were to be repaired. The problem was, on the dock, they crumbled, because what they discovered is there was nothing left of the 3/4-inch steel from which the stacks had been formed. The only thing that remained was about 30 coats of paint that had been applied over the years. That was the thing that was holding whatever it was together, but there was no substance to it. There's a lot of churches, and sometimes individuals within those churches, if we're not careful, wear the name of Jesus, have the heritage and the history, but underneath it all, there's nothing. And so Jesus says, I don't care about the looks. I mean, the looks, what we do matters, but if you are faking this, if you are a hypocrite and you think that somehow just because you look the part that's sufficient, you're missing the boat. And so Jesus, I think, in doing this says it's not enough to simply look the part. It matters what's really going on inside. Number 2, the church cannot become a hideout or a cover for your life of sin elsewhere. Let's just be honest. It's very possible to live a certain way during the week and to think that somehow showing up on a Saturday night in a church or a Sunday morning in a church, that makes everything okay. And then I can go back to my whatever life I want to live during the week. I think what Jesus is saying is, no, I'll not be mocked. You reap what you sow. That's not how this thing works. If you're going to wear my name, you need to live as if that's true. In a short little devotion today in the Word, it says this. He made free use of Christian vocabulary. He talked about the blessing of the Almighty and the Christian confessions which would become the pillars of his new government. He assumed the earnestness of a man weighed down by historic responsibility. He handed out pious stories to the press, especially to the church papers. He showed his tattered Bible and declared that he drew the strength of his great work from it, as scores of pious people welcomed him as a man sent from God. Indeed, Adolf Hitler was a master of outward religiosity with no inward reality. The church can't be a hideout for doing what you really want to do. And Jesus coming to the temple in that moment says so in his judgment. This is not, I don't care what your heritage is. I don't care what location you're at. I care what's happening in here. And then number 3, the house of God, the people of God, exists to be a witness to those on the outside looking in. We're not meant to be a wall keeping others from God. That the church exists, the people of God exist to be a megaphone, a lighthouse to the rest of the world, that hope lives here. Once upon a time, some visitors took a tour of an oil refinery. And the tour guide showed them all the intricacies of the refining process. The vast catalysts of chambers, the pipes, the heating vats, everything that went into the refining of the oil. And as the tour ended, one of the visitors asked the tour guide a simple question. Sir, you showed us everything except the shipping department. This size oil refinery processes a huge amount of petroleum, turning it into gasoline, into lubricants. But you haven't showed us where it's all put into containers and shipped out to the world. Well, you see, said the tour guide, we don't have a shipping department because everything that is produced in this refinery is used up as energy to keep the refinery going. You see, if you run a refinery for the simple fact of having a refinery to run, you're missing the point. If you are a church that exists just to simply keep the doors open for the people in the club, you've missed the point. Jesus says we exist to be a lighthouse to the world so that others can know there's hope, that there's light in the midst of darkness. Jesus coming into the streets of Jerusalem and into the temple that day is not only a message to the Jewish people of his time, but to the church of today as well, because we can fall into the same kinds of traps. As we prepare our hearts for the cross on Good Friday and for the empty tomb on Sunday, we've got to go through this process in which we look in and say, are our hearts where they ought to be? And then we also begin to look out and say, is our focus where it needs to be to those that are yet to know him? This morning as we come to communion, this is our weekly declaration of Good Friday and Easter both. Sometimes people say, well, Easter, Resurrection Sunday is something that happens this particular time of the year, but for us, it's a weekly occurrence. We're retelling the story every week that Jesus went to the cross, and because he went to the cross and he bore our sins for us and he died for us in our place, there is hope. And not only that, 3 days later he rose from the grave. So not only is sin conquered, but so is death. That's what communion is all about. And so this morning as we come to communion, if you are a Christian, you don't have to be a member here, but if you're a Christian, you're welcome to partake with us as we kind of retell this whole week of Good Friday and Easter in this moment of taking the bread and the cup. As the trays are passed, go ahead and take those 2 cups and then pass them along. If you're not a Christian yet, and this doesn't really make sense yet, I would love to talk to you in the guest connection area afterwards to help you see what does next look like. Let's pray. Lord Jesus, as we come to you, we sometimes become so familiar with you that we miss your heart and your passion, and the fact that you didn't come just to kind of tinker around the edges of our lives. You came to kill the tree, so to speak, so that a new one could come up in its place, that new life could come. And so I pray now as we come to communion, we be reminded that we are that new life in you. And where other things have entered in, where other sin or distractions have entered in, I pray in this moment that you would cleanse us, that our hands and our hearts and our minds would be clean before you. And that as we spend time with you and we remember and we declare what you did on the cross and the empty tomb, that we will continue, even in this moment, in the days ahead and through this week, be transformed by that very historic act. As we look back and then as we look forward to you coming, we give you glory. It's in your name we pray. Amen.